Welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sue DeCaro, and I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Erin Taylor. And today we are interviewing the amazing John Duffy, who is the highly sought-after clinical psychologist, best-selling author, certified life coach, parenting and relationship expert, and proud husband and father. John has been working with individuals, couples, teens, and families for nearly 20 years. He is a regular contributing parent expert on the Steve Harvey Show and WGN Radio. We're really excited that John is with us today.
So yes, great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing this time with us, John.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, guys.
So I think what we'd like to start off by talking about is your book, your amazing book. Can you tell us a little bit about how it came to be and who it's for?
Yes. It came to be in a way that I really didn't anticipate or plan for. I was working with this young man, and he was 16 years old, and I'd spent a number of sessions, just he and I, and he was really likable and charismatic and charming and smart, and I liked everything about him, and he was dealing with just a little bit of anxiety that we were already making a dent in. And one afternoon we decided to invite his father in because I hadn't met him, and I usually do family work when I work with a teenager. And suddenly his dad comes in, and this boy is acting completely differently toward his father. He's being snarky, he's being mean, he's being nasty, and at some point it got so ugly that I kicked the dad out and asked this kid, like, well, what is your problem? Suddenly you are acting awful. And he said, and I'll never forget, he said, I know what this looks like. I know it looks like I'm the jerk here. It looks like I'm unavailable. But he was unavailable first. And he used the word available. That wasn't even my word. I take no credit for it. And I asked him what he meant, and he said, when I became a teenager around middle school, my dad started acting differently toward me. He was afraid about, my grades. He was nervous about what was going to happen in terms of my schooling, whether I was going to do drugs, whether I was going to drink. And so he started acting we used to be fun, and we used to have a great time together. Now he's suspicious of me, and he's disconnected and always checking my grades and, kind of looking in my room for things. And so it felt like emotionally his father was unavailable, and just as a self-preservation move, this boy responded in kind. And so piggybacking on that concept, I just paid attention to other kids I was working with who effectively echoed the same thing, over and over and over again. So I found myself lecturing to parents that if you parent from a place of fear or judgment or ego, your kids are going to pick up on that, and they're going to know that you're not really there for them, that you're just acting out of fear. And it's a concept that I've been playing with for years, and it really has legs in parenting, especially parenting teens and tweens. Although I have to say, the more I talk about it, the more I listen to people about it, I think it applies to kids of any age and any relationship effectively. So that's how it kind of, in a long story short, that's kind of how it came to be.
What a fabulous story. I just love that. And I think you're so right about the whole topic of fear. When we parent from a place of fear, it's not pretty, and it doesn't go well.
Mm. Yeah.
No, that's the truth. That's the truth, and that's what I think gets in our way more than anything else. And in fairness to we parents, there are some things to be afraid of, so I don't want to dismiss that altogether. But I think when we act just out of fear, and we kind of are accusatory and removed instead of connecting with our kids, we create the circumstances where our fears have this room to bear themselves out. Whereas if we stay connected with our kids like we did when they were younger, usually things work out. I mean, not that our kids will never experiment or make the wrong decisions here and there, but we're available to them then as guides and consultants when things go wrong. And when we act out of fear, effectively what we're telling our kids is, hey, you know what? I can't really handle your difficulties. You're going to have to go somewhere else with that, or just sit on your own and be anxious on your own, which happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. I think many parents hearing this interview may be very interested in purchasing the book. So towards the end, if you wouldn't mind sharing where they can get the book so we can make sure that everybody who wants to purchase it has that opportunity. John, the next question we have for you is kind of a four-part question because we know there's so many people that you deal with. We want to make sure we tap into to all of them. So the question is really based on the biggest struggles that you find your clients are facing as you work with them, from a clinical psychological standpoint. So,
Yep.
let's start with teens, and then we'll work our way, back, I guess, to preteens, and then forward to parents
Sure.
and couples.
Good. Good. It's interesting because what parents often bring their teens to me for is what looks like laziness or a lack of motivation. They're just not doing well enough in school. They're not engaging. They're looking at their phone too often. They're playing video games. I always find that laziness is never the problem. Almost always, I'm dealing with an anxious child who lacks faith in him or herself to some extent, and then they opt out of their lives in some significant way. And once we can kind of create an atmosphere where it's really clear that mom and dad believe that you are capable and that I believe you are capable as your therapist, and you finally adopt that, then motivation comes pretty easily. So, regardless of what the presenting issue is, whether it's a lack of motivation, or it's anxiety, or it's depression, or it's social issues, once we can get past that idea that I'm not capable and competent and resilient and smart, then almost always these teenagers are kind of off to the races. It's a really, I have to say, kind of a gratifying thing to be a part of, a process to witness, and a privilege in my life, something I kind of didn't even expect. When I started this job, I didn't anticipate working with teenagers. These were just happened to be the referrals that came my way, and I needed to keep a practice afloat. But it's been joyful and more informative. I find kids to be so wise today, and I tell parents frequently, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, that if you're really anxious about the idea that the kids are ruining the culture with their texting and their staring at the screens, if you sit down and you talk to somebody who's 16 for an hour, you will find faith in that generation immediately. So I always want parents to replace me in that process so that they can enjoy that part of their parenting, because so many of them miss it and never meet the kids really that I have the luxury of knowing. It's just such a disservice to families,
Beautiful. Yeah. So if you look at the preteens, do you see the preteens, with very similar challenges then? What is coming to you and what's presented to you is not really what's beneath the surface. Is that what you're seeing there as well?
Absolutely, yeah. And it manifests a little differently with preteens. Because you see this advent in preteens of social concerns, kind of suddenly coming into their lives. I worked with a boy yesterday, and he's 13, so he's just kind of on the cusp, and he's prepubescent, and so, or close, and you can feel like for the first time in his life he's socially lost his footing, so there's this anxiety around that, like, what's going on? Am I doing something wrong? My friends seem to be moving on from me in a way, and I don't know how to connect with new people. And previously in his life, it was always so organic, connecting with kids his age, and now suddenly it feels like, wow, I'm kind of on an island here. And so I think the fix is the same. But the presenting issues tend to be different, and with preteens, almost always what I'm dealing with is something social, more than something academic or something like that. Not as an absolute rule, but by and large, that's the case. That there's this the first advent of these social concerns where it's like, I'm not sure where I belong socially, and I never even not only did I not think about it before, but I never knew. I never considered it before. Now all of a sudden it's this kind of front and center part of my mind. And I think what makes it compounding in terms of difficulty for preteens is that they've got, I think you guys can see, they've got these these smartphones, and they've got access to all the social media and stuff, and so they're suddenly aware of likes and and followers, and I think as adults we think like, well, I don't know if our kids' self-esteem is that wrapped up in that, but to be really honest with you, a lot of the preteens I work with and young teenagers, they are part of the reason they are so drawn to that screen is to just see, is there anybody bearing witness, to my world, or does nobody care, like and in the worst case, it looks like nobody cares about me, and there's no likes here, or there's no followers here, and my God, what does that mean, in terms of my social life going forward? I'm alone.
Yeah, I think we see that happen in adults too, but it's sad when you see these young people going through this. And I wonder, in thinking about the preteens, the relationships seem to be organic and on the playground before they get access to all the social media that kind of shift it to, as you said, more of a confidence booster, or a confidence what's the word I'm looking for, destruction, basically.
Absolutely, yeah. In a way, I think, relative to a generation ago, I think we're asking our preteens to grow up too fast. I like those playground years. I think that everybody could use another year or two where it's just kind of that, like, I'm friends with everybody, like if there's a game going on, I feel comfortable just joining right in. And now I think the anxiety around whether that's okay or not comes earlier than it used to, and it feels like this disservice to kids, and I don't know that they're just emotionally prepared for that kind of perceived rejection. Oftentimes I think it has, there isn't any rejection there. There's just anxiety around it because they're aware, like, of the possibility that I might not belong, I might not feel liked, and I think back a generation ago, and I think there were, in my class, in grade school, middle school, just a few kids who felt that way. And now I think it's epidemic.
Yeah. We're not speaking to each other anymore. It's all through the devices. Yes. So when you think about parents and the parenting challenge, what do you find? I mean, you shared with us a little bit about the fear. Would you say fear is the most, is the biggest obstacle that you're seeing in parents, or is there something else that really speaks louder than that?
I think fear is the biggest obstacle by far. And the reason that fear is such a problem is that it by definition takes away any opportunity for real connection. So kids are really, as you know, kids are intuitive, and they can pick up on the idea that their parents don't have faith that they can handle a situation, or that their mom or dad has their ego involved in a situation, like, boy, I better get an A because it seems like this has something to do with how dad feels about himself, or I better make that team, or I better be a starter, or, like this kind of pressure that has something to do with mom and dad's ego. And I think judgment also plays a role. I work with a lot of parents who come into the door of this room, judging their kids, for what they are not, instead of kind of like celebrating what they are. And I think that, not that there's never room for improvement, but I think we need to do a lot more in the way of kind of celebrating the strengths of our kids. I'm a therapist, so I expect that I'm going to hear the problems, but I always press parents in those initial sessions, like, tell me the great things about this kid. Tell me what works really, really well, because I always figure, like, if we can build on that, the things that aren't working well, I'll bet those will dissipate fairly quickly, and that tends to be the case, but there's this reluctance that we have as parents because we're afraid, and I think it's a genuine thing, by the way. I think it's kind of, there's so much pressure on kids, and, I think when our kids are in kindergarten, we're already thinking, like, boy, are they going to be able to be successful in the world? Will they get into college? Will they, or am I going to have a 40-year-old on my couch, a generation from now? I think parents kind of think way, way ahead, and I think part of that is cultural too. I think there's so much pressure on parents, and because we feel all these pressures, I think we kind of press them down on our kids, and our kids just aren't equipped to handle their own pressures because they've got smartphones and all these screens in front of them and all this data and information streaming past them so quickly that they certainly aren't equipped to handle our anxieties on top of their own. You know, they're pioneers in so many ways, and to add what we're afraid of on top of what they're afraid of, it gets to be too much.
I think that's such a good point that you bring up. I'm thinking about how, like you said, the societal effect that we as parents feel. And I'm thinking even something as simple as a 529 plan, a college savings investment plan. So the encouragement, if you have the means to do so, is to start a college 529 plan when the baby leaves the hospital. Right? Now that's sensible financial planning, which is great, but you don't even know when the baby's 1 day old. You don't even know if that baby's going to want to go to college. So we're launching 18 years into the future before we even know who our little baby is or what they're going to like or want to do.
What a great example. I hadn't scaled it all the way back to birth in my mind, but you're right. We are encouraged to do that. A lot of people do, and you're right. It's kind of like, then all of a sudden you feel like from day one there's this demand that the narrative lay out this certain way, and we don't even know. We have no idea who this person is, and I think part of the joy of parenting ought to be helping them discover that instead of kind of over planning it, right? And helicoptering around them, for those 18 years, making sure that 529 plan comes to fruition, instead of just celebrating, the day to day, like what an interesting person that's developing here that's probably different than the person I envisioned on day one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's our ego, kids are off to college as soon as they're born. That's the mission we have for them. I just wanted to touch on what you said about, kind of shifting the process away from, the challenges, away from the fears, and, into the strengths of the child and discovering the beauty of, what these children already have. And, I think in our line of work too, shifting the parents away from the challenges and into the strengths is like a gift, because many of us as parents, and I have been there years ago, we just, not anymore, we just focus on all the problems that we see and all the things that our children are missing or that we're missing or, lack and fear. And so, that shift is such a gift, I think, that you give your clients, your patients, in such a beautiful way. And as you said, you see that shift as well. So I celebrate that with you. I think that's beautiful.
Thank you. And it's also just a gift to parents, I think, just to ease their own stress that there are these strengths there. I think we forget because, if something goes wrong academically, for example, and that might be the most potent example, we tend to focus on that. And the entirety then of our interaction with our kid becomes around, you've got a D in math, and there might be 2 A's on that report card, but we're not talking about the A's. We're focused on the D, so, right. To spend some time celebrating who our child is and to recognize and really accept that this might not be the person I pictured, so I might learn something from them. I tell this story, and I can't remember if I told it when I first met you, the two of you, about this dad who's kind of this very buttoned-up guy whose 17-year-old son now decided he wanted to be a rapper, so, this was so far afield from anything the dad ever pictured. But recently, I made the dad listen to a little bit of his music, and he's like, oh boy, I don't like this a whole lot. And then the son said, listen to the words. He slowed his dad down. He's like, listen to the words, listen to the lyrics, and he wrote them out for his dad, and his dad was like, wow, you're a really good writer. So he recognized you're a really good writer. This is really profound. I didn't know you felt this way. And then suddenly they had this dialogue going, but it took, if dad had stopped it as, like, no, you're not going to be a rapper. We're not going to talk about this. We're going to talk about, you getting into business school like I'm planning. then he would have missed out on any recognition of that enormous strength. And do I think 10 years from now that boy will be a rapper? I doubt it. But there was something there that was important to him, some strength that he was honing, something he was really working on. And I was really grateful that this dad was willing to slow his mind down just enough to connect with him around it. Not that he loved that, he didn't, but I think his son really appreciated the beat, the moment he took just to like listen and attend to it. And that's like kind of this deposit in the emotional bank account. So when dad wants to talk about the D on the report card, I think he gets a little space to do that. Where if he shut his son down, I think he'd have very little play there.
Yeah, and that says so much about connection and how important it is, to be able to have honest communication and trust and discuss the difficult challenges as well as the beautiful things that are happening in our children's lives. So,
agreed completely.
Now, how about with couples? Because I know you work with couples as well. What kind of challenges do you see, that are ones that really speak loudly to you, or a challenge that speaks loudly?
Well, the biggest challenge I find with couples, and I'm working with a number of couples right now, and the theme couldn't be more clear, is miscommunication. And miscommunication is not quite the right word. Under-communication. I think the couples that I find that I'm working with right now love each other deeply. And so like, and sometimes I'm working with couples where I think, somebody's got a foot out the door. And our job here is to end this relationship with grace somehow. But right now I'm working with couples who I can tell love each other and want to be together, but they're missing each other communication-wise. Somehow they're speaking different languages, and they're not exhibiting the patience they need to really hear each other out. So there's some fear there because, I think there's fear of losing the other person and this fear of not being heard, So what I find myself doing an awful lot of the time is asking couples to switch places effectively and communicate for the other. Like, like Bob, what do you think Janet's trying to say? I want you to say it as if you're her, and it may seem like kind of a cheesy, almost arduous exercise, but it's necessary because way too often we miss each other, as couples, and then the rift becomes deeper unnecessarily, and then I think what could be a really viable, vibrant relationship can become really disconnected. Even if they stay together, they can become disconnected and find each other to be more of a burden than a joy, and that's a great disservice to their relationship, to that coupledom. But if they take a moment and really make sure that they're hearing well, instead of kind of positioning themselves to win. Like oftentimes when couples first come in, there's a debate, there's an issue that they have, finances, or something about in-laws or something like that, and usually they're kind of looking for me to be arbiter somehow, to declare a winner. and my point is always like, well, if somebody wins, we all lose. Like we really want to make sure that you both win, that you're on the same side of the table instead of opposite sides, kind of, and that you're working together and that you see each other as allies, because then you can kind of lift each other up. And too often I find that couples kind of drag each other down unnecessarily, and it's just a matter of communicating more fully, and I think because we're so busy in our lives, we fail that too often.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that technique of asking the parents to switch places, or the couples to switch places, and try to speak what they think the other person is trying to express, because wow, there's nothing more, I would imagine, enlightening than suddenly being kind of on the hot seat trying to not, and something that Sue and I talk about is listening to hear and not to respond. So suddenly being in a place where they're having to think, wow, what is this person actually trying to say, instead of just not even hearing a word they're saying.
Aaron,
That's
it. Yeah, and right, that's exactly it. And it's kind of fun to see the surprise, even when they discover it themselves, like when they say, here's what I think my spouse or my partner is trying to say, and when they stumble upon it or they hear it, it's fun to see the surprise and to finally realize, oh, okay, I get it. Well, maybe what we're saying isn't that different. Maybe we're really closer to the same page than we thought we were. And that more often than not is the case. And so this this divide between us is unnecessary. We're just not listening very well. And the whole point of the exercise, which actually turns out to be a really fun, enlightening exercise that some people practice outside of these rooms. It really bears its fruit. It's incredibly powerful and effective.
Just to kind of take that a step further, because I can imagine it's extremely effective, and then also might even transfer to the children. I talk about listening to be heard, in my household, listening to hear, not just to respond. And so I'm wondering if they practice that when, you're working with a couple, if they practice that as well, or that kind of changes their relationships with their children in terms of their listening and connecting.
Definitely. I know this because I worked with a couple recently, and they've got 3 kids, all teenagers, and so I saw the whole family for a couple of sessions to kind of work through some family issues, and the kids said, well, we keep having to change places and make and present each other's arguments, and we're effectively doing all this therapy at home, and they're kind of laughing, but I think it works. You know what I mean? I think that modeling that at home, really good communication, listening, slowing down a little bit, I think that really works very effectively for kids. And the earlier I think we kind of model that kind of communication for our kids, the better they are at communicating. And it's striking to me how remarkably good a lot of kids are at communicating. Oftentimes the modeling goes the other way, where kids will say to their parents, you're not hearing my point, so just give me a moment, let me articulate this. I work with one young woman now, but I worked with her when she was a teenager, who will stop her parents, and she'll say, if you don't mind stopping, I don't think you're hearing each other's points, or I don't think you're hearing my point. So sometimes, it even the wisdom of communicating fully sometimes is derivative of the kids. Sometimes comes directly from them.
Love it. That's
great.
That's
particularly cool to see. Yeah.
That's fabulous. And Sue and I very often will speak for each other. So Sue, I'm going to speak for you right this moment. We do many workshops with parents where somebody will stand up and say, I love what you're talking about, I love your message, but my spouse is not on the same page. How do I get them there? And I can definitely envision us telling your story about what you do with parents and how you help them to really understand each other. And I'm really excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's great. That's great. I love that. And I'll have to I'll cop to this. I think that in terms of communication difficulties, I think my gender, more than yours, is responsible for kind of short-circuiting communication. I think we're getting kind of glacially better at it over time as a gender, men, but still there's so much room to improve there, and more often than not, I'm encouraging a man, slow down and listen here, and the being right is overrated, and making sure you're listening well, that's an underrated skill, in particular, I think, for men. And so, I think that's a particular challenge that I think a lot of men have to work on. I think women are better listeners as a whole by quite a bit, actually. When I see a teenager or a tween-aged child, almost invariably, it's a mom bringing that child in. It's a mom who understands. It's a mom who hears. And I look forward to the day when somehow that evens out, and there's as many dads who are engaged and involved in that way, because I think then, we're all communicating and we're all closer to the same page. And I think there's room for that there if we as a gender can recognize the power and strength of vulnerability and openness and good communication. And we're, I think there are some guys out there, who are amazing at it, but I think we have a lot of work to do as a gender, to accept that that's where our strength lies, instead of kind of just grinding through, which I think is kind of a misnomer that we, have come to believe.
Yeah, sooner than later, hopefully, John.
Right?
Yes.
Right. Agreed.
We've done a lot of work and a lot of discussions in our group, in our Building Connected Communities group, about men and women and the communication gap and how we bridge it and everything. And I think one of the conclusions that we've come to is that it's going to take men like yourself to be that voice that reaches out to other men, to tell them and show them by example that this is a more effective way to operate in your world and in your life. I don't think it's as effective when it comes from females. So I appreciate you being a voice for those men.
Well, thank you, and I agree, and I think there is this kind of enormous groundswell of men who are involved in therapy and self-help and coaching groups and a lot of different things. The tribal men's groups. Where this is starting to shift. And I think you're right. I think it's men modeling for other men that you can still be the guy's guy and be sensitive and emotional and empathic, and that there's a lot of strength in doing that. That's probably where our primary strength is. And when we think we're invulnerable, that's probably when we're at our weakest point. So I think we have to redefine for ourselves as men what strength means. Because I think we have it. I think our fathers probably had it backwards, and so it's on my generation of men and maybe my son's generation to kind of find a way to shift that and allow vulnerability to be part of our strength. I appreciate the thought.
For sure.
Very wise, very wise. So what would you say is the most rewarding part of your work with families?
Yeah. I like working with families because families are, when they come into the therapy room, they're often in at least a state of pseudo-crisis where something has to change, and so we're usually at the tipping point, when we're starting, and so change tends to come pretty quickly. And they're open to ideas because they've tried a lot of things. By the time they get here, this isn't a fun place to come. Typically something's not going perfectly well if you end up in this spot. And so it's encouraging to see families who are open and willing to change. But the most rewarding part is to see people discover their wisdom, because a lot of times people will come in the door with this kind of self-loathing, whether it's a father or mother, children, whoever in a family, and almost invariably, if I ask the right questions, they will find answers and recognize, like, I think I kind of maybe had that all along. I just needed the safest space I could find in order to discover that. So it's never in imparting something that I know, it's almost always in helping somebody discover what they know and what's remarkable about them, about their uniqueness in their mind, and it's, to a person, it works that way. You know what I mean? I haven't met anybody where I thought, you know, I don't know if they have the gift of wisdom. You know, I think everybody possesses it, and so it's the joy of this room is helping people peel back those layers of fear and judgment and ego and anxiety and depression and discover what's remarkable and unique and wise about themselves. And if we do it right here, that's what happens.
It's beautiful. So, you know, when you think about the work that you're doing, how would you say your parenting has influenced your work, or your work has influenced your parenting? I imagine they kind of go both ways.
They absolutely do. So I have one child, George. He's 20, and he is well aware that you know, as he was a young teenager, I was writing this book, and so, you know, he could tell even in real time. Well, I'm testing out a theory on him. You know, like we're playing with something here. You know, he could tell you if you were on this call right now. He could tell you what availability is, what role fear, judgment, and ego play. So he's been my test case. You know, he's been my unwitting test case. And I'll say, you know, there are many things I'm not very good at. I can't drive a nail straight. But parenting him has been the greatest joy of my life, and I think my wife Julie would say the same. And what he taught me is to listen to him and to allow his greatness to bloom and step back and recognize, oh, he is not my project to create. It's not, you know, and to you know, press into some direction or another. I'm more here to bear witness, and if he needs me in some way, he needs to know I'm available for him. And so, you know, his life has gone differently than I thought it would in a lot of ways, but I found that I admire him in ways. He has these strengths that kind of blow me away, and I can honestly say I'm not sure I know exactly where they came from, but I am impressed with him. And so I suppose the most remarkable thing about parenting him has been how much I've learned directly from him. And I assure you that's not hyperbolic. It's absolutely true. I mean, he's, you know, I tend toward anxiety a little bit, and he will catch me. He'll say, you know, like, are you in the moment here, or, you know, are you a little bit anxious, you know? And I'll be like, wow, that good call, man. You're right on, you know. And so that's what I've encouraged parents to do, is to allow themselves to step back and be a little bit in wonder and awe at their own children, instead of trying to, you know, create them, because they're creating. They're going, you know, they will find their path if you're available as a guide and a consultant when they need you, you know. And I think it's the greatest thing, the most interesting thing, when their path is so different than what you pictured. And George, you know, like, one quick story. George came to me when he was a freshman in high school, and he said, I think I'm going to play water polo. Like, I never did anything in the water. I never, you know, so I thought, you know, well, he'll probably play tennis or something like I did. And he brings up this sport, and I don't even know what it is at the time. And I was like, okay, I guess, you know, like, I don't, is it safe? Is it like volleyball? What, you know? And it turns out like this was his greatest strength, you know. And there was part of me in the back of my mind, I thought about saying, you know, like, no, why don't you do something else, you know? And I'm so grateful that I had the moment to say, you know, like, yeah, if that's what you're interested in doing, go ahead and do it, and let's see how it goes, you know, and to kind of just entrust him to that project and to the coach and let them kind of have their run with it. So, you know, one thing I find I encourage parents to do is parent less, not more. You know what I mean? Like so intervene less and just witness more, you know, and I think that's a really important message for parents to hear, and something I had to learn on the job. You know, like I wasn't able to really preach that very effectively until I recognized the more I intervene, the more it seems like I'm getting in George's way. But the less I intervene and the more I'm just here, if he needs me, the more he's finding his way, you know. and so that's what I find myself, working with parents on every single day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A lot of the work we do too also mirrors that, John, in asking parents to take a step back, from a coaching standpoint, and allowing their children to grow and thrive in their own way, without us trying to fix them or change them, and how they can actually learn more about themselves through their child or children. It sounds like you had that experience as well, but our children are here to help us grow as well as us provide the space and tools and support to help them grow. So I think that's just beautiful.
I love that. And I love the way you put that. I mean, that's so true. And I appreciate the work that the two of you do as far as that goes, because I don't know that message can be expressed enough. I think it's going to take a lot of us to get parents to kind of change the way they operate and they function as parents, and allow themselves that joy. I worry that when parents are not available in the way you're describing, they're missing out on this great opportunity to enjoy their children and the process of their maturing in their own way. So I love that you do it, and I love that you do it that way.
Thank you.
I just started with a new couple, working with a new couple last night, and so we're just in the very beginning phases, and the mom said to me, I feel like parenting isn't quite as joyful as I thought it would be. She said there are moments of joy, but there seems to be not enough joy and a whole lot more work. And I said, well, our goal in this work together is to bring the joy up and bring the work down, so that you can have those moments where you just sit back and just, wow, look at your child and say, you are so incredible. I am just in awe of who you are.
It's what that is such an important message, right? The less work you make it, the more joy there is. I think that's true. You asked about intimate relationships earlier, and I think that's true there as well. Oftentimes, a couple come to me. This happened recently, and said, well, relationships are a lot of work, and I think we kind of accept that just as an ism in our lives, that oh, relationships are a lot of work, so you've got to, and that language suggests it's arduous and joyless, and it almost drives that feeling, and I think the same is true of parenting. Parenting's a lot of work. Parenting a teenager is awful. I lead these terrible years. And I think we have to attend to the language we use around all of our relationships to take the awful out of it, because there's this shtick that I think we have developed because it's kind of funny, or maybe carries us through what we think are going to be difficult times. But in my experience, I don't think parenting, my personal experience, parenting never was awful. I didn't see terrible twos. Georgia's teenage years weren't awful, and another thing that we say oftentimes is, well, you don't want to be your kid's friend. And so I think parents take that so literally that they avoid even an alliance with their children, so that they create something adversarial. And, and I would argue that, well, you want to be friendly, you want to be connected, you want to be joyful, you want to have some good times. Otherwise, there's no payoff, and relationships have payoff. Relationships are enjoyable. That's why we engage in them. That's why we have children too, and to ignore that part or to dismiss it with some little pablum is such a grand disservice.
Agreed. And the labels are huge. I mean, the terrible twos, I was just talking to a client about the other day, because I used to send my daughter to the terrific twos at the YMCA when she was 2 years old, and I thought, I'm adopting that, because if I think of it as the terrible twos, I'm going to live it as the terrible twos. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I've renamed that with everybody I talk to, the terrific twos. Terrific threes,
I love
fours,
that.
The terrific teenage years. We can use that word for everything. So
Brilliant.
I think it's a mindset. Got to change
it's a
that
mindset. Yep. No, that's a great. What a great reframe, right? The terrific twos, and then you're you're looking for what's terrific in those years, right? And there may be tantrums, and there may be, spilled milk, but those become the exceptions instead of the rule, and I think that's really important, because otherwise, who would have the energy, and I think that's what a lot of times we run into is, oftentimes when a couple comes in here, or a family comes in here, or a parent comes in here with a teenager, they're tapped out because their presumption coming in is, well, this is awful, this time is going to be wretched, and it's just like waiting it out and hoping everything works out okay, instead of making the assumption like, oh, it's going to be better than okay, it's going to be really great. Will it have its bumps? Yeah, and those will be memorable, but by and large it's going to be like this really wonderful journey and lifelong, not just these few years,
Right.
Yeah.
Well said.
Very well said. So here's a question that's on my mind. I'm really, really curious about this. It is very clear that you are able to create a safe space in your office for teens to share and open up. So I'm wondering what it is you do to create that safe space in your office, and the bigger question I have is, how do you help parents to create that safe space at home?
Great question. And the answer is, it was not very easy at first. In graduate school, we're kind of taught this kind of very clinical approach to most any problem, and so when I started getting teen referrals, I would get out my pad of paper and my clipboard and start asking this series of questions, of diagnostic questions and demographic questions, and it was kind of cold and clinical and disconnected. Years ago, I was working with this brilliant girl, and about 15 minutes into my interviewing her, I mean, really just one question with one word answers after another, she's just staring at me and she says, is this how it's going to go? Are you going to keep asking questions like this? Are you ever going to just talk to me? And she effectively said, if you're up for it, put the thing down and let's just talk. And then if you need information later, I'll just fill it out myself. And it was so brilliant. It was so brilliant of her. And it was such a great lesson for me. Oh, okay, that's a great idea. Let's just talk. And then we formed a very strong connection right away that was kind of casual, and she drove that boat and started talking about the music she likes and brought some in, and it was right when iPods came out, and she's like, well, we're going to listen to music, and I'll tell you what I like about it. And so I was able to learn these lessons from kids about how to talk to them, and most of it had to do with listening. It wasn't about oh, you're having difficulties academically, well, let me tell you how to fix that. Kids are smart. They know how to fix that. They know that there's something in the way, and they need to talk it through. So part of it was just allowing a relaxed, calm, casual enough atmosphere that was just conversational. And it didn't have to be, early on I thought, well, I'm going to have to be really, really hip. I'm going to have to, dress and act as if I'm 17. Otherwise, I'm never going to get through to them. That doesn't work. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for an adult, who's sincere and authentic with them, and so that's kind of the atmosphere I created, and followed their lead, and so what I encourage parents to do is to kind of create that kind of space at home. And it's hard, I think, for a lot of parents. I worked recently with a dad who's this very, very buttoned up, very conservative. I really like him. He's uptight, and his son is this remarkably gentle, emotionally intelligent, astute kid who knows his dad's not listening to him. And so in here we kind of tried to change the tone and and get them to just talk about some things that they have in common. And invariably there's a couple of things we land on, but almost always when I'm working with teenagers and parents, if I can get to music and get them talking about music, that's something that universally everybody loves, but typically teens and parents don't like the same music. So
I hear you.
so this particular dad and son, they kind of had this thing where they were going to listen to a song, 2 songs a day, one chosen by the dad, one chosen by the son, and then over time they would go to concerts, one chosen by the dad and one chosen by the son, and it was interesting. Sometimes it worked, and the son would love going to see the Eagles, and the dad would like going to see Lil Wayne or something, but even if it didn't, they were there. They were connecting. They were talking about it, and it's a space where they can meet and connect. And it doesn't have to be music, but I found more frequently than not, if I'm absolutely lost as to where the connection is, we can create something right there.
That's beautiful. So it sounds like a lot of listening to connect.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, in the end, that's the key. Is we started out talking about fear, and I think it's like kind of bringing that fear down to a point where at least some of the time you are listening and connecting. Every day, I encourage this every day. Protect a little bit of time, and again, kids work in sound bites, so you're rarely going to get an hour or 2 hours. They're not going to get this long meeting, and so I encourage parents not to do that, not to plan a lecture for their kids, but to just spend a little time just connecting, and playing, effectively.
It's beautiful. So I just love the work that you do, and it sounds like you have great relationships with all of the people that you are working with. But if you could make any changes in what you do today, what would they be, if there are any?
Right, that's a great question. I'd like to work fewer hours.
Okay.
I suppose. If I'm being perfectly honest,
Yeah.
In a way, I'd like to take my own advice a little bit better, because I can talk a very good game about being present and available, but I think I need to work on that all the time as well. So part of it is, bringing my professional life into my personal life as much as it is vice versa. And I'm kind of curious to work with different kinds of relationships. This concept of availability. I think I've tinkered with availability in the workplace. Bosses and employees, and just in different types of relationships and friendships, and most any kind of relationship. And to see whether any relationship out there can be enriched by kind of tamping down fear and judgment and ego, and focusing on being present and available and listening better, So I suppose, if it were entirely up to me, I would broaden the concept and bring it into most every element of our lives, and maybe most prevalently, and I'm kind of writing about this these days, I think a lot of us, because we've got our screens and because we're busy, and because we're parenting and driving our kids around and working so hard, we're not very available sometimes to ourselves. So we don't, we kind of just go through motions instead of giving ourselves a moment of, of thought, and okay, I'm going to take a moment just to breathe and just to relax and just to maybe have a cup of coffee or tea and just look outside, take a walk. I think we fail that so often. And I'm guilty of this as much as anybody, I promise you. So availability to the self, is I think critical, and maybe precedes being available to any other relationship. It might be the most important thing, and then it spreads out from there. But I think if I were to change anything in the immediate run with the people I work with, it would be like, are you here now? Are you here for yourself right now? In any given moment. And the more we are, I think the better off we are, and the more emotionally healthy we are. And I had a girl tell me yesterday, our emotional wellness is our biggest job, because we can't do anything unless we're well. She's 17 years old, but what a great lesson. Yeah.
It reminds me of that word permission. I use that word a lot these days, and giving ourselves permission to take care of ourselves as a priority, as the first thing.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. Right. Permission. That's that's probably what's lacking a lot of the time, is just that permission to take a moment.
It's okay. Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up here with our wonderful conversation with you, I want to take a moment to acknowledge you and thank you for the work that you're doing, the important work that you're doing with kids and families of all different combinations. The people who encounter you and cross your path are so fortunate to hear your wisdom, your authenticity, and you know, Sue and I knew when we heard you talk, well, when we heard your interview with Todd and Kathy Adams on Zen Parenting Radio, and then when we heard you talk at their conference a couple of weeks ago, we knew that we wanted to have a conversation with you and share your wisdom with our audience. And I want to acknowledge you for all the wonderful, important work that you're doing and for being one of those voices for men and that role model to show men how you can be a strong leader and still be sensitive and emotional and wise and caring. And I just think you're awesome. I think we're huge fans of yours.
Yes, agreed.
Well, that goes both ways, Erin and Sue. Thank you for that, and I'm a big fan of the two of you as well. And and I think we're kind of I love to hear how like-minded we are. It's good to know that there are people out there fighting that same fight. So so I that admiration goes both ways, absolutely. And I have a deep appreciation for the work that the two of you do as well. Deep appreciation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we always say that we want to change the world, but we can't do it alone. So I totally agree that it's wonderful to connect with like-minded people who are doing similar kind of work in the world and doing their part to change it. So it's great.
Yes, agreed.
So where can people find out more about you, and where can they purchase a copy of your amazing book?
Yeah, so my website is drjohnduffy.com. I've got a parenting video series of just parenting lessons and tips at parentbetternow.com. My book is available on Amazon, and I think you can buy it directly off my website as well. And in about 2 weeks, I have a podcast coming up. So there's a lot going on, and that'll be on my website as well.
Oh, great.
You have your own podcast? You're starting your own?
I am. I've been inspired by Todd and Kathy.
Exciting.
That's great. That's great.
That's fabulous. I will definitely be subscribing to that.
Me as well.
Excellent. Good. I'll let you know when it comes up.
Yeah, definitely let us know.
Wonderful.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing your amazing ideas and thoughts and experience. And we look forward to maybe connecting again in the future to continue this conversation.
I would love it. Thank you for having me, guys.
Thanks so much, John. Take good care.
Bye-bye. You do the same. Bye.
Bye.